Morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar that we have called How Will COVID-19 Affect Stadium Designs? We have been organizing it from IDOM together with ESMA, the European Safety and Security Management Association. We count today with Gary van Missel instead of Cyril de Brecht. We had some unfortunate problem for him attending today. You can see that we are also counting with Cesar Zarate, our sports architecture director, together with me, Javier Davila, to explain you which is our view on the stadium design after COVID-19. With further ado, I will give the ground to Jari so he can introduce us the point of view from ESMA on how COVID-19 has been affecting the venues. Jari van Minsel is the research and data analysis from ESMA, and he will be he has been running the survey that ESMA is sharing with us this morning. Jari, whenever you want.
Yes, thank you, Javier. Thank you for your introduction, and thank you for having us here and for allowing us to share our results from our COVID-19 survey. I'm trying. Okay, so what we did in the beginning of March, as we saw that a lot of venues across Europe were, of course, dealing with the results of COVID-19. We saw that a lot of venues were actually closing down all of their operations. More than 80% were closing their venues as well as their home offices. It was impossible for them to continue normal operations, and so they had to find some kind of way to offer their infrastructure for alternative uses to help combat the fight against the virus. And they found several ways to do that. All across Europe, we saw different examples. For example, in Croke Park, we saw a drive-through testing center. We saw field hospitals in Principality Stadium, but for example, also in the Maracanã in Brazil. We saw logistics hubs being set up, like in the United Center in Chicago, but also in Bernabeu in Madrid. And we saw a lot of venues offering their infrastructure for the National Health Services. So here we see the O2 Arena in London, which was used as an education and training center. But we can also see, for example, Chelsea FC, who offered their Millennium Hotel for NHS staff to stay there instead of going home and back to London each morning. So we saw that all venues around Europe were kind of trying to offer their own kind of help to help combat the virus. Then, as of June 2020, we saw that more and more countries were decreasing the measures around social distancing, and that small crowds were once again allowed back in the stadium. And so clubs were able to once again attract customers to the venue, and they had to find some kind of creative way to do this and to be able to generate income from it. So we also saw examples from that. One of the examples that we saw in the US market was movie screenings, drive-in movie screenings at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, but also the Olympic Stadium in Amsterdam did a similar kind of thing. So this is a perfect way to kind of generate extra revenue, use your stadium, but still keep in mind the measures that are in effect, like social distancing. We see them doing it with a kind of drive-in system, but also outside the stadium with a large open-air patio, where people can still respect the social distancing, and at the same time, stadiums are able to generate revenue through it. We also saw small exclusive business dinners on the pitch here at FC Groningen, but also at Johan Cruyff Arena. And then, of course, finally, we saw stadiums using their catering facilities and opening pop-up restaurants, all around Europe. But this is an example from NAC Breda in the Netherlands. Then we saw, of course, one slide too far. Then we saw, of course, in March 2020 also that the not only the venues were being used again, but also the competitions were restarting again. Most competitions were temporarily halted. Some were stopped definitively. But those who were halted were restarting once again in June 2020. Of course, most of them decided to do it behind closed doors, which is probably a safe option to go. But some countries were also allowing limited amounts of crowds in their stadium. We saw, for example, in Poland, up to 25% of stadium capacity being allowed again in the stadium, or in Russia, up to 10%. And this is one map which is maybe a little bit outdated right now, but it was a map provided by the end of May by European leagues, where they offered an overview of all the competitions when they were restarting. And as we can see, the map was coloring quite green, so most competitions decided actually to restart again. There were only 4 competitions in Europe which were halted and completely stopped. That was in France, in Belgium, in Netherlands, and in Scotland. They will not resume the competition. But so, as we can see, all the other competitions in Europe are restarting again, or have restarted again by now. What we saw then, of course, was some of these competitions were allowing limited amounts of crowds, as we said before. So yeah, we can see here the examples of Hungary, Poland, and even in New Zealand, they had a game with a completely filled stadium. Now, New Zealand was not very affected by the virus. It was one of the countries that did quite well in combating it. But as we can see, all stadiums around Europe and around the world are working once again to get people back into the stadium effectively. But yeah, of course, stadium operators are willing to do this. And we also saw that fans are willing to come back to the stadium. That was proven by a study by Fan Striker. But of course, these fans don't just, they expect certain measures to be in place when they come back to the stadium. So as we can see here, what do they expect from stadium operators to provide for them? 72% of the people expect there to be some kind of disinfecting gels all around the stadium, but also 70% of people expect there to be a larger window for the arrival times so that they can be spread a little bit more, and so not that we have a kind of bottleneck effect where people come all together at the entrance, for example. They want to eliminate that risk, and so they are asking stadium operators to really spread the arrival times. Also, 65% of people would demand everyone to wear a face mask if they come back to the stadium. And then finally, there's also an opportunity for stadium operators, as 53% of people are willing to buy some kind of club branded items like face masks or gloves, for example. Then we analyzed 5 big challenges that stadium operators are dealing with today, and we have highlighted 2 that we will explain here today. So the first one is sponsorship visibility, of course, because a lot of matches were halted or cancelled. There was a lot of visibility lost for sponsors, and so there was a survey from the ESA, the European Sponsorship Association, where they were kind of where they wanted to know the impact that this COVID-19 virus has had on the sponsorship industry for sports. 30% of the participants agreed that COVID-19 will have a long-term negative effect on sponsorships. But at the same time, they're also saying that 72% of brands are keen to extend their sponsorship deals. And more than half of the participants in the survey are actually expecting a higher appetite for live events. So especially for sports, this is a very big opportunity. It's something that sponsors will be maybe a little bit more interested in. And then finally, they also saw a rise of digital platforms and esports, as we have been seeing over the last years, but it's maybe even more important right now. So what can clubs do to really offer more value to their sponsors? So as we said, new opportunities are arising through esports and through online activation. But clubs also are trying to find new ways to keep sponsors satisfied. And they can do this. One of the opportunities that was there was because there were no crowds, there was maybe a little bit more space for advertising. And so clubs really used that during this period. They used branded player tunnels, double or even triple rows of advertising, as we saw in some Bundesliga games. They used extra exposure behind the goal lines. And even for Real Madrid, at their training facility where they played their matches, they used virtual advertising, which fans could see on their screens at home. Then fans or clubs also wanted to engage with fans in a new way. They had to do it online. So we saw a lot of clubs developing a dedicated app, like FC St. Pauli had, where fans can ask questions, but they can also see the latest news. They can see information from sponsors. We saw a lot of clubs engaging in esports even more during this COVID-19 period. And we saw a lot of online interviews with players, coaches, and even sponsors. And then finally, we also saw that some leagues were offering some kind of free access to their digital platforms, like the NFL did with their League Pass, which is really a good way to engage with fans and to offer some advertising opportunities. And then last but not least, we also saw that clubs were trying to improve the stadium experience. When these matches were being played behind closed doors, they kind of had the effect of, some people were saying a training session. So clubs didn't really want this, and they wanted fans to have the feeling, even though they're watching the games at home, that it was really a filled stadium. And even more importantly, maybe we also saw a study that there is actually a negative influence if you are playing behind closed doors, if you don't have fans to support you. The winning percentage drops from 46% to 36%, and the home advantage is kind of lost. So fans really tried to artificially maybe enhance the stadium experience. So we saw opportunities like augmented reality, but also virtual fans, which was used a lot in La Liga. And artificial crowd noises, of course, which was used basically all around the world. A lot of different competitions who were using it. We also saw some examples at Borussia Park of cardboard cutouts to fill the stands. And then finally, we also had banners to fill the empty stands, fan pictures, even fan jerseys to fill the stands. And we saw one example that started in Denmark of LED screens, and that way really virtually bringing the fans from home into the stadium. So yeah, I think we saw a lot of different technological and sometimes even less technological opportunities and inventions that clubs have used really to make the best out of this period of playing matches behind closed doors during COVID-19. And yeah, we're really eager to see what technologies they will use once fans are allowed back into the stadium, and how they will deal with that in a safe and healthy way. But I think that you as architects will be able to say more about that.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jari, for the introduction and your great description. Well, considering what you just saw and knowing what Javier will detail afterwards, I find it interesting to bring 3 general considerations for today's discussion. First of all, I find it relevant how the football ecosystem has shown agility to implement substantial changes for the global emergency situation we have been living, mainly in 2 aspects. One, the quick adaptations of stadiums as emergency situation infrastructures, with the examples from Jari as turning stadiums into hospitals, movie theaters, COVID-19 testing facilities, etc., making them safe places. And 2, quick adaptation of technologies around the football ecosystem, mostly so far with the broadcasting technology, which provides the main incomes to football. We have seen stadiums being modified both digitally and physically to this new reality, the one of football without the spectators. This makes me think that our stadiums will be capable of adapting again to unknown and new situations to come. A second thought comes from realizing the social responsibility that the world of sport has always had, and which has been further increased in these pandemic times. While the public authorities have an obligation to work on a line to adapt convention centers or to create new hospitals, I find great value on how stadiums, which are mostly private, have been capable of adapting with the same level of recognizability. And to end with, the third comment goes to the media capability that football industry already has, and which has been conveniently applied to solidarity campaigns as the ones we can see here. This has the longest way ahead without any doubt. Such way ahead should be also capable of influencing on the negative examples we are also seeing nowadays, as a prevention towards a negative attitude in celebration, for example, some days ago. Although good attitudes have also been seen, the media capability should be applied to avoid such bad examples. Okay, within this frame, I will now give the floor to Javier Davila so he can tell us in detail which are the aspects to be considered to face the new situations, not just only in existing stadiums, but also in the stadiums to be designed yet, and which architects and engineers should evaluate and provide such services from now on.
Thank you, Cesar. Well, basically now I will explain those integrated design aspects that not me, but also my colleagues, architects and engineers, have been collecting recently. And we have put them together as these main ideas that I show you on the screen now. There is the question of transportation. We have social distancing giving us a feeling of changing our transport habits, both on match day and non-match day situation. And we have to pay attention on how this is going to affect the experience of the match day. We have things to learn from our colleagues, our infrastructures in the United States on that, because they can solve this issue in a different way, making funds come earlier with more specific fund engagement activities. We also have a point about sustainable renovations, both from minor adaptations to also recovering urban stadiums. We have to address the feasibility of the required renovations that we have to adapt to each stadium to make it sustainable. We want to address also the access and crowd flows. It's very important, even more important than actual capacity, in our opinion, is how to control that crowd. So that will become a key aspect, and that will be actually altering the way that we design stadiums, either renovations or new builds. We also want to make a point about air quality, cleaning and disinfection, and the service areas that we need to address probably with minor adaptations in existing stadiums, but always trying to provide more flexible buildings with wider performance on match and non-match day situations and emergency situations. So we will take a look on that. And then to end with, we'll go a little bit on the technology. As we have said with Yari's explanation, technology has been the one coming to the rescue, but it's not just fan engagement or broadcasting. It has to come also with expectations of screening, distance trackers, and also cleaning systems, ultraviolet cleaning system, nanotechnology, new materials. So we will look a little bit on that. The main idea is that we all think that this is coming, this pandemic is coming from a climate change situation. So what we could do from our stadium designs is to fight that climate change with more sustainability in a holistic way. So let's take a look in that order, as I said, about the mobility first. In the short term, we know that now this situation of social distancing is inviting us to use more individual transportation. It's also beneficial for the entire community because we reduce emissions. If we take the bicycle, for example, we know that the contamination has been one of these critical factors to spread viruses as COVID-19 because they affect the respiratory system. And all this has been seen in many, many cities in the world. We have been seeing a very interesting trend in big cities in Europe, like Milano, Paris, Barcelona, even New York. So, well, this is calling us to highlight that we need a cultural change here, or that a cultural change could be coming to reduce the private transport. With less car use, we could have more individual transportation, and that will become an alternative to transport systems. And we also have to think about this in the same way as Mrs. Andrea Schonen in the ESMA webinar on the 2nd of July. She was calling us about the situation with the shuttle services. We have plenty of stadiums in our environment, in our ecosystem, that depend on shuttle services, on mass transportation systems, and we have to be careful on how to, well, follow the current advice to minimize the public transport in a way, but also to take the opportunity to improve it in the future. So this is what we see. There must be a cultural change, and this cultural change is coming from this situation on the left, which is the current one, that pedestrians are the minimum. Bicycle can have some impact, and then the public transport takes everything, with most of it as a private transport. We should go to that shared transport and with more individual transportation systems. So this is giving us another opportunity for our stadium design to make our stadiums become actual transport hubs. That they can become an interchange for light public transportation, shared transportation, and sustainable individual mobility. And where we were seeing car parking, we should be having bicycle parking instead, or other individual transportation systems. In any case, in the medium term, this is what we have seen in our cities. We have seen more public uses of the streets. We have seen that the urban areas were recovered for recreational and pedestrian public use. And we will also see, with this increase of teleworking, that we will have a reduced commuting time in our cities, because it will be reduced in a way. So this is also giving us an idea that will affect our stadium designs, which is that return to the urban centers. All those stadiums that are now in our city centers, and we were having maybe concerns on how to operate them, they should be a new opportunity to become a continuous space from the pedestrian public spaces, and how to make them work efficiently to the city. And this is precisely what we can see, that in the long term, we see a larger interest into moving from the suburban stadium to the urban stadium, on how to recover those synergies with the public spaces in the city. They will reduce the car parking, they will increase the use of bicycles, individual transportation. So all that with a coordinated and integrated sustainable light transport system. This is the opportunity that we can see. We can see that the renovation of the urban stadiums that are now in our cities may be suffering from the difficulties to manage them. This is the opportunity to revamp them and to recover them for the cities. But then, if we are talking about being in the city, then there is another issue that we have to address, which is the access to the stadium. We put this example because this is a very open and friendly open space around the stadium for an access. In urban situations, this is not the common thing to happen. So the new designs for stadiums should be addressing these arrival areas and accesses to be dimensioned for this new interpersonal distance. not just as an emergency egress space as they are being managed nowadays, but more as areas where we have to engage our fans before the match and help them get into the stadium in a safer environment. As we said, in a very similar thing that is happening in the United States venues, that people have all these different attitudes to come earlier to the stadiums. Well, those areas surrounding the stadiums, we should be addressing that design to allow for overlay requirements now for temporary situations that are coming from even temperature controls, screening. Well, those should be temporary. That's what we believe. But there is no need for renovation investments on those elements. But we should take that opportunity to actually revamp those areas outside our stadiums, provide that fan engagement that can bring the match day experience, that can allow people to come earlier, and well, with more comfort in a way. The only problem here is that those surroundings of the stadiums are most of the times off limits of the property. So what we see here is that there must be a close liaison with the city council of each city to manage this, but it's a great opportunity. Now I want to show you what happens with that kind of crowd situation. What we believe is this is an animation of a simulation that we have done in our stadium in Bilbao, San Mamés. And what we can see is that the turnstiles will become the hotspot to access the stadium, where the social distance is the problem. So what we see is that each stadium will behave differently depending on their own external conditions, and not just by the number of turnstiles or the actual flow of it. Even the way to display or to overlay the queues will affect, as we can see here in the image. The turnstiles capacity will be the key. Yes, you can assess it from your actual data that you have right now in your stadium. You can already analyze how is it going to be working. And yes, we understand that some of the plans are calling for very strict timings to access the stadium, as we always do with boarding an airplane, for example. Okay, that will work, but that will work only in the outside. It won't work. It won't work inside the stadium, and it won't work either on helping building the match day experience. It will be quite an issue. So we have to have something outside the stadium and inside the stadium to help build that match day experience. And then just to highlight there must be just a good analysis on this situation, because long queues are going to be a big issue. If we allow for too long periods of time to get into the stadium, that will be an actual problem. So the thing is to make a good technical assessment of each stadium conditions, to elaborate an adequate organizing plan, and to put these functional changes in place that might be needed. We want to also check on the ticketing nightmare, as we called it here. Well, we have seen many solutions available in the market, but each club has to manage its own situation. What we want to highlight here is that the design for the seating capacities, in our opinion, shouldn't be changed. But well, the capacity limitations and the masks are the right choice, quite probably. But the thing is not to fix it on the percentage on the ball capacity. What we believe is that it has to be linked to the actual access flows, access capacities, and the way to move the crowds inside the stadium, not that much in the capacity, because those are the general sanitary rules. But the problem doesn't come on the ball; it comes from the circulation inside the stadium. So what we can see is that from that ticketing nightmare, we will quite soon come into full capacity again, as soon as the vaccination is available. And that's why we say that there shouldn't be dramatic changes on the layout or on the display on the sitting stands. And we all want to have this back because we understand the revenue generation, we understand the fan experience, we understand the home advantage that Jari was highlighting before. What we have to do is to allow for more flexibility of those seating capacity, for flexible sections at different levels, but not to change capacity numbers. So what we need is those flexible sections to allow for possible segmentation, if required, to allow for stadium routes, or routes that are flexible inside the stadium to get to your seating position. And the key will be, as we say, in the crowd control. The vertical circulation is the one that will be affecting, and each stadium will perform based on its own conditions. There is no magic trick here. There is no 50% capacity, 30% capacity, 10% capacity. It has to go with analyzing your stadium conditions. It has to go on setting those routes to solve maybe actual problems that you might have. You might have narrow passages. You might have constrained landings. You might have certain situations that other stadium won't have. So the key is to work on your stadium plans and to set those routes that will allow your fans to come safely. Considering the stairs, considering the escalators, if you have them, considering the lifts capacities, well, all that should be managed with the deep analysis of your own conditions. We have another video here with another crowd control situation, which is the halftime. Halftime flows are the real problem. Yes, we have seen that you can control people coming in by making them come earlier. You can keep them safe on your sitting stands. But when halftime comes, everyone has to go to the toilet. Everyone wants to go to the bar, get something. So that is the real problem. That won't be working with stewards. That's what we believe, because well, it could be very complicated to manage several thousands of people moving around. So this simulation, what it's showing is, well, you quite understand that these avatars are not behaving as normal people. They want to go to that hotspot altogether. But that is identifying your hotspots on your stadium. And that identifies, for example, in this simulation, we can see there on the right top, we can see some empty space. So those kind of simulations can identify which are your existing spaces. Simulating that concentration, you can analyze if you have to put some temporary or final actions to help those people not to get too much together, to have temporary bars or temporary toilets at that gap that we can see in that circulation area. That can be shown with this kind of simulation of your stadium conditions. And when we go to new stadiums, well, basically we will have to see that larger circulation areas will be required with an increased ratio of square meters per person to allow for this more social distancing, that we understand that it will be here to stay. In any case, well, you can see all those poor avatars are wanting to go to the toilets. Then the obvious thing is that technology that we all think about, which is open access to the toilets, contactless configurations of the elements there in the toilet. That has a very small impact on your investment, and no real difference on operational costs. But well, that could be really required. We'll go to that later on. Then in the end, what we can see is that these large circulation areas are probably going to be the key. We have to improve that ventilation. We have to facilitate that social distancing, and even with a very open and good ventilation stadiums like these ones that we're showing, even on that you can have narrow spaces that will require an analysis if it's existing, or rethinking when we go to a new design. On the services areas, we also want to highlight that we all have to think about improving the ventilation and those social distancing. This example is really, really amazing, the way that they put the club outside on a terrace in Barcelona. But that is also telling us that, well, there is a thing here, which is, yes, we need increased ventilation, we need natural ventilation as much as possible, but not every city has the wonderful weather as Barcelona has. So well, we have to analyze each situation and each design. And then there is a question mark here, which is, would there be a growing interest on having more boxes to have a more secure feeling instead of sitting together with the rest of the fans? Well, we don't think that will be coming, but well, it is quite probably that these kind of more private spaces would be interesting, but maybe not with final implementations, but maybe more temporarily. What we can see, as Tessa said, is that the adaptation that we have seen in our stadiums is really, really amazing. What we have to think is about how to make that kind of situation to be a near standard. So not just the stadiums have to be probably from now on designed to be able to undertake massive sanitary alarm system situations, but also to treat spaces to be more flexible than they are now. So what we understand is that locking dogs, back of the house spaces at the stadium should be treated a little bit more like other smaller venues have already, like arenas. In a loading dock, in a warehouse, in an arena, it's very common to have overlay situations when you have a concert, when you want to have more locker rooms, different configurations of that space. So that we should be bringing it into our stadiums as a must from now on. So even considering that kind of transformation of the stadium structures themselves, well, this is an old question, right? The way that, well, do we need to transform a stadium on the pitch to allow for multiple sports? Well, we still believe that stadiums are better working with their own specific sport, but maybe that transformation capability should be brought to the back of the stadium to be making more transformation capacities at the back of house, and that they could be generating even more flexibility of use for a non-match day situation as well. When it comes to the service areas like VIP spaces or convention centers in our stadiums, well, we have to focus on improving the air quality. And again, this is another thing that you have to consider your own climate situation, the location of your stadium, on how to improve this. But the key is natural ventilation as much as possible. Increasing it in the operational hours so that your ventilation is working at least 2 hours ahead of the match and at least 2 hours ahead of after the match is finished. Even as much as possible, keeping it 24/7 working for you as a ventilation renovation capabilities. When we're talking about air conditioning systems, we have to control the filtration. We must go for an upgrade on the filtration capabilities as much as possible. Checking the dampers, the mixed dampers, checking the water tightness of the filters. So we have to control all that to be working as smoothly as possible to generate the maximum air quality. And then one thing that our engineers are also highlighting is to have a humidity control. Sometimes it's not set, also depending on our locations. We consider that that's a must from now on, and to have it on a more humid condition. So usually the indoor spaces are treated on 40% humidity control. Let's move them to 60%. With that, we will increase the performance of our ventilation systems, and we will be creating a safer environment on air quality. And then when it goes to the other areas in the stadium, like toilets and locker rooms, well, the improvement of ventilation and air quality goes exactly the same. But well, we have some additional things to consider, like this contactless design that we are always saying it's very simple, it's easy to implement, and makes a lot of sense, even from sustainability point of view, from saving water and all those other elements. So it would be interesting that could be implemented, and well, even a little more additional automation systems like toilet flushers that only flush if the lid is down. That small thing can provide a much larger, safer approach to your toilets and locker rooms. And when it goes to the locker rooms, we bring here an idea, which is ultraviolet germicidal lamps. This is an operation theater, and this system is kind of widely used in healthcare systems. We believe that it's very interesting that we can consider them in our locker rooms and indoor situations. Well, because the ultraviolet systems can be used in many locations, from even on the air handling units at the air conditioning systems inside to disinfect those ducts. They can be set to disinfect small spaces when they are not in use. So the ultraviolet lamp goes only on when the space is empty, or as they do in operation theaters, with lamps which are okay for people to be there in the meantime. So all these systems, we believe that they have a good way to go in our stadiums because they have been tested and improved for many years in healthcare systems. Then we also want to highlight what we already said with Jari on the technology at the stands. We have seen that kind of approach to fan engagement and to not to lose the home advantage. Well, these things don't have to stay. We all understand that because it's a limited effort with a limited investment on this very limited situation. But post-vaccine, the capacities are going back to normal, but some things that we could be implementing and analyzing at this moment are very beneficial for the future. The improvements on public address and speaker systems, when we have been analyzing during these pandemic months on how to bring more atmosphere with the stadium empty, so that is an actual great improvement in the public address systems that can be used in the future. Also the broadcasting elements that we have been seeing, the new positions, the kind of artificial intelligence technology put to broadcasting. So all those elements, we believe that they are very beneficial and they are going to be here to stay. The same as the contactless technology. It has been all over the place all this time, and it's the time to give it a good impulse from mobile ticketing, so that you don't have to print your tickets and then everything is contactless anyway. Contactless payment that was a very important trend in the last months. Well, now is the time to actually implement it in a good way. And as we said, getting those contactless systems in the building appliances as well. As we said, not just the toilets, but toilet taps, lighting switches, door locks, so everywhere that you can install it. We also want to understand that the technology that has been analyzed for mobility is going to be also helpful, and we see a place for it to be here. We bring in here the example of Amazon with this distance tracker. We can see that this is quite easily implemented in our stadiums. We have plenty of circulation areas with screens broadcasting our internal feed. So, well, they can fit this too, and we can help our fans to move a little more safely. And not just this, also with the apps that are controlling the systems to come in to the stadium and assisting the security personnel that we have. When we are talking about safety technology, we have all this issue about being too intrusive. So yes, the most intrusive system, we know that it will be less accepted by our fans. And they also have this problem that they will be the most expensive investment to do. So, well, our kind of advice from the designing point of view is that don't go too quick into implementing very intrusive systems at this moment. Let's go better with overlay situations and temporary situations. And then, well, what we can understand is that, for example, temperature controls integrated into the turnstiles, well, they will make sense, and probably is the less intrusive thing that we can implement in our stadiums. And then the most intrusive, which would be probably a problem, is well, having this kind of artificial vision to identify if people are using the mask, the same way as we were already talking about having that link to the security controls to avoid hooligans in our stadiums. Well, we see that there is a lot of synergy on those elements now with the COVID-19 situation, but the controversy of its use is still going in high numbers. So well, our advice is not to go for them at this moment. And just to end with what we were saying before about new materials and the technology, once again, back to rescue. What we can see is that this is going to be the opportunity to explore all the sides of the technology, which are not the ones that have been coming into play in these pandemic months, but the next ones to come. What about the exploration of antibacterial materials that can be used for many locations in our stadiums, so that we can improve the disinfection of those spaces? Why not? Why don't we think about more unusual solutions, like what about controlling the ultraviolet light through our roofing systems? Can we explore new materials that can control that ultraviolet radiation, so they are protected, our fans are protected during the match, but then with some technology we can allow the ultraviolet light to come in when the stadium is not in use, and then we are enhancing the disinfection of our stands, the same way as we were saying before about the ultraviolet lamps. So, and why not recovering some traditional materials, as we are showing there in the picture, some materials which are traditional and which have antibacterial properties already, like copper. Well, we can see room for you know, technology bringing us back all those traditional materials as well. So these were our ideas. So we want to summarize by giving you the key takeaways. As we said, please consider your stadium location, whether it's existing or a new design idea. Consider it within the city and with the city. Liaise with your city council, manage your surrounding areas, and consider that your location makes a lot of sense, and even more sense now, because it has to be affecting the transportation system around you. That will bring you to consider sustainable renovation of existing stadiums, instead of maybe just moving away from the city center or just discarding them because they are not fit for purpose anymore. Well, there must be a good interest to consider that now. When we go to existing stadium, please consider assessing your existing conditions with crowd simulations with deep analysis of your conditions. And for those elements, partial renovations will play a big role. Small implementations, temporary implementations, contactless technology. Well, we have been touching several aspects with partial renovations that will probably make a lot of sense in existing stadiums. Always improve your air conditions, no doubt about it. Just go for it. Just put the right amount of technology, not too intrusive and not too definitive, because our advice is not to go for large investments at this moment. And as we said, for a new stadium project, everything in this list has to be explored, because all of these elements are the ones that will be affecting the designs in the future. The only thing we can say is that we all have to prepare ahead of the return of the fans, so that we can have them back into our stadiums, feeling safe and enjoying our teams, which is what we all love. And with that, that's the end of my speech today. The idea would be that Jari can now tell us about some questions that you might have been raising up, and we'll be very happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Javier. Very interesting presentation about the architecture sites. We have had a lot of questions from clubs over the last months about this, so it was very interesting to see that. We have had some questions in from our participants. Maybe a first one from Andy Kwemi, if I'm pronouncing it right. There are a lot of matches being played behind closed doors. Who are those actually permitted to attend these matches? Of course, it's not just the players. Is it also club executives, administrators, maybe stadium operators? Do you have any idea about that?
Well, right now the attendance is strictly limited to the actual operation of the clubs themselves, the two clubs playing, and the operational of the stadium itself. So I can tell you that security is still there, just in case anything happens. You know, even if the attendance is reduced or limited or even non-existent, you can always have an issue with security. So that's still in. And well, the very basic operation is still there, much limited to the stadium itself. Yes, the clubs obviously bring top executives. That's obvious. But well, there's no big problem with that attendance. What we can see is that in the future, as we said before, when you have some thousands of people coming in, well, we have to be ready to let them come in a comfortable way, in a safe way, so that they are not, you know, having a tough time when they come to enjoy their team in the stadium.
Okay. A second question from Andy was, at the moment, players are of course being tested before matches, but are match day stewards, safety and security officers, media personnel, are they also being tested, or do you maybe see some technologies, as you said before, being used in the future to test them, at least by maybe temperature or things like that? What is the current situation there?
Well, what we can see is that, and this is relevant to what we said, that back of house of the stadium, that is the one that will be having maybe more adaptations or more renovations in a way. So what we can see is that, as we said, there's a before vaccination situation and after vaccination situation. At this moment, well, everyone being engaged in the match, they're being tested some way. I mean, I cannot say if they're testing them the same way as they do with players or not, but all of them are tested because they are, well, taking part on this behind doors scenario. And in the future, the same way as we're saying that maybe we could implement some systems temporarily to access the stadiums, we have to have mostly the same thing happening at the back of the house of the stadium. So everyone which is working during the match they have to have the same safety situation as anyone else, not just for the fans. So the systems will be more or less the same, temperature controls for sure, testing when you're going to have more, close engagement with other people for whichever reason. So yes, it will be there, and the important thing is to adapt our what we call it the back of house of the building to be able to adapt all this and to be easy to transform for emergency situations, for any other non-match day condition that will making it more flexible. So, well, those testing elements will be there for some time. The idea would be just to realize when do we set them as a fixed element in our existing stadium, and how do we plan for those spaces to be ready for that in the new designs.
Okay. Then we have also seen some competitions already allowing limited amounts of crowds back into the stadium. We've seen different kind of percentages, 10% of capacity, 25% of capacity. Do you have any recommendation of what the capacity should be? And also, have you seen maybe La Liga in Spain carry out any analysis to determine an appropriate capacity for stadiums?
Yeah, that's the very big question, right? Everyone wants to say, what is it? Is it 30? Is it 50? Is it 10? Well, if you pay attention to what we said before, what we are actually saying is that, well, our recommendations from the design point of view is maybe it's not that relevant, but the idea would be to challenge that. I wouldn't say that we have to challenge the health authorities onto giving us a percentage. But what we say is that that must be challenged based on the specific stadium conditions of each stadium, with those crowd analysis, with those crowd flows for people, with the facilities that you have, with the circulation spaces you have in your stadium. So each one should be having a different capacity. And I understand that that is a very tricky thing, because there will be arguments, but without giving you any example, any specific examples, so that nobody can tell us that we are being, bad on any team or any stadium. There are stadiums which have worse circulation areas, worse constrained spaces, worse landings on the stairs than others, and those should be allowed to have less people. As simple as that. So would it be a disadvantage for that club? Would it be unfair? Well, we don't believe so. What we believe is that each stadium has to be analyzed. Well, we are in a good time. We can now plan ahead of that. We can analyze each stadium and see which are those capacities. And our advice will be to challenge that in a way. Not every stadium has to have a percentage of capacity, and that would be a mistake probably, because they are not, as we said, 40% in one stadium doesn't make the same sense in another stadium, and it might be even unsafe for a safety point of view.
Okay, perfect. Okay, you also showed an example of kind of crowd tracking, social distancing technology that was used at Amazon. Are you looking also at other industries to find solutions that could also be applied at stadiums, maybe retail or airports, for example?
Well, we have been bringing this today because it's the one that we find more interesting on actual indoor tracking. But the good point, as you said, there are many other sectors in the industry which have something. What we didn't highlight here, because I didn't bring images, is on how the mobility apps can help you also a lot on planning your trip to the stadium, which system, which transportation system to use. How do I go? Well, we have seen that at Amsterdam. It's working quite well with the Amsterdam Marina, so, because you have all this transportation hub around. So that kind of condition is going to be probably the key, and that is going just to simple apps that you have on your telephone. So that kind of technology is good. What we brought here is the one that we see is more is easier to transfer to the stadium design and operation.
And then you also show the simulation of track management or crowd management tracking. This is a question from Laszlo Horvat from the Hungarian Federation. What did you kind of base those simulations on, and what did you learn from them? How crowds can be managed inside a stadium? How important are those kind of simulations to you to find actual solutions?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's basically, as I said when I was showing the simulation, of course they don't behave as normal people do, but they show you the hotspots. They show you where is the likeness of more concentration of people on your stadium, and then they highlight the empty spaces. So that serves you well to analyze where to put your temporary solutions or your overlay situations to manage that crowd much better than putting stewards around. So if you actually locate a temporary bar in that empty space that your simulation is telling you that you have, you are quite likely diverting several hundreds of people around, and that's very, very useful. And that only goes with your specific stadium conditions, with your specific drawings, and with the simulation that you can run to test how to do it.
Yeah, and the individual approach is basically something to take in mind generally. As Andy Quim here says again in a question, situation in Germany is completely different from the situation in the UK, Spain and Italy. So it's probably not possible to have uniform methods. Everybody has to deal with it individually, I guess.
Yeah, well, and that's a very good question to end with, because that's specifically what we believe. Well, we are here in Europe. We are with a European association, and we are Europeans ourselves. So even if we think about Europe, we know that we are very different countries with very different competitions and very different climate conditions. So everything that we said today, it has to be applicable to each one of them, to each condition of each stadium, either new or existing, and it has to be individual. We believe that. And as I said before, a percentage set by the sanitary authorities in Germany doesn't make any sense in Spain, and maybe the weather conditions in Barcelona are a key thing when you go to addressing the air quality, and those won't be applicable in northern Netherlands, for example. So there's no point. It has to be individual.
Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for your very clear answers. I believe we are running out of time now slowly. Yep. So if people have any more questions, how can they reach you at IDEM?
Yeah, well, what we can say is that basically we are thanking everyone for attending this webinar. We have this contacts here for you to use. Well, not Cyril now, because it has been Yagi, the one speaking, because well, he couldn't attend today for some last-minute problem. But in any case, our contacts are here. You can contact us to address all this situation, or maybe to explore which are your conditions or your design plans. And what we will do is that in our website, after this webinar, you will get a link to get the recorded version of the webinar anyway, and you can contact us anytime to address your situations. Okay. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jari, for your support. Thank you, Cesar, for the introduction. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar. I hope that it has been interesting. Thank you very much.